Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. I don't know where you are, I don't care. I have been told by an esteemed YouTube professor that to better link with your audience, you have to create a bond with them. You have to link with them, you have to open yourself up to be more relatable, less formal. Become a friend. Make it so that they would consider you your close online friend to create this very profitable repeating loop where they would watch your videos simply because they were treating it as if they were chatting with a friend and listening in to their stories, right? It's basically what happened with the rise of React streamers and React YouTubers. That form of media is simply the content creator acting as a conduit for the viewer to pretend they are experiencing the same thing as them. Same with the chat on Twitch. You're pretending that you're, in a movie theater reacting with your friends. It's just the same thing as when you were at school. And the day before you saw something cool, you played a video game and something cool happened. So you wanted to go to school and tell your friends what happened, right? It's also the same thing that's been happening with, cam girls, Twitch thoughts, Instagram ladies, and why they have risen so much in popularity. Because they are giving these same people the same treatment, the same service, except, as your imaginary girlfriend. Anyways, I told this professor to fuck off. He's not the boss of me, I do whatever I want. And what I wanted to do was, this, actually. I wanted to go over my reasoning to choose a main spec. I tried to frame this as being still informative, because maybe you can use this same process for your own choice, if you're undecided. But more closely is because, I've made a lot of videos, if you haven't noticed, about rankings, ratings, reviews, guides, patch notes. All of that is very informal, it's very objective. I'm just trying to look at a class or a spec in the most objective way. I loathe Arcane Mage and I despise Marksmanship Hunter. I still made a video, completely impartial about how to play, what to play and what to do with Marksmanship Hunter. So in this video it's going to be, more subjective. My own opinion and my own ideas about my choice and what did I think when choosing the specs and classes I wanted to play. So let's go over and take a glimpse, just a tiny glimpse of the galaxy brain of this person. This person is me, by the way. So the two first things I did when choosing my mains were the two questions. Number one, which roles do I want to play? And number two, how many characters do I want to play? Someone might ask me, but my liege, my lord, your majesty, shouldn't the first question be which is the character, which is the spec you have the most fun with, the more enjoyable one? That's something you are told often, right? Just play what you like, just play what you enjoy, which is true. It is correct, my servant. Nice observation. However, it is still a subsidiary point to the main one, which is the role. If you asked me if I enjoy more Affliction Warlock or Blood DK, I would tell you Blood DK. So if you asked me if I wanted to play Blood DK or Affliction Warlock, I would still say Affliction, because I wanted to be a ranged DPS. So that's the first thing I considered. The second one was essentially how much grinding is there going to be in Shadowlands? How much of a drag is it going to be to log in on Wednesday, on reset, and realizing all the stuff you have to do mandatory on all your characters, right? Logging in when you want to keep up 4 characters and knowing you have to cap island expeditions on all 4 of them, you have to do your war front on all of them, it was a drag. All of the emissaries for all the AP grinding. In Legion you had the emissaries, you had the Wither scenario, you had to do the LFR, normal, heroic and mythic modes of all the previous raids to increase the chances of dropping a legendary. So all these systems are going to drag you down eventually. You will start the expansion, you will approach the expansion super hyped. Oh yeah, I'm totally gonna play 4 different characters. And then, faced with the reality of the grinding, you will tone back. After exploring the amount of grinding I needed to do in Shadowlands, I came up with the guess that I was able to keep up 3 characters at the same time without too much issue. The grinding has been greatly reduced in Shadowlands. I know, every single expansion you have people saying this exact same thing. Oh, this time the grinding is very low. It's reduced in BFA. In Legion, oh no, it's gonna be fun. AP is not that big of a deal. And every time, it turned out to be a disaster. But in Shadowlands, you can trust me. The grinding is very, very limited. Every week you want to do 2 floor 7 wings of Torghast, the 2 wings that are available. It's gonna take you less than an hour per character, and you want to do the 2 weekly quests that increase your renown. Renown is the rank you have with your Covenant, which is needed to unlock the conduit ranks. The passive and the active conduit slots are unlocked by your renown level, so every week you want to do those 2 weekly quests. 1 to gain anima and 1 to go into the Maw and get souls. Both of these weekly quests take you less than half an hour to an hour each. And that's all the grinding you have to do. Even the more min-maxing caveat grinding, which is the special realignment apparatus item from Venari, grinding in demo for Stygia so you can buy yourself a socket. It's also limited. Number one, there are only 5 socket slots in your gear, 6 if you count double ring. And number two, demo is also going to be capped. The more you stay in demo, the more you attract the jailer's attention. Once you reach rank 5, you die, and you have to leave until next reset, next daily reset. So that's also limited. So with these two decisions, with these two things in mind, I thought I want 3 characters, and the roles I want to play were range DPS, because I'm raiding in a Mythic Raiding Guild as a range DPS. I wanted to play melee DPS or tank in Mythic Plus, maybe even healer sometimes, if the class was right for it. Basically any role that wasn't range DPS for Mythic Plus. And then the third spec was a spec that could have been viable for my raid, for my raid comp, for my raid group, as an alternative to my range DPS main. Those were the things I was considering. And that's when I started going class by class. Before I started removing possible options, I started with the caveat that I was going to play Shaman Elemental as either my main range DPS character or my alternative range DPS character, one of the two. That was the only caveat when going over the specs. So the first that died was Warrior. Warrior was essentially only viable, only possible for my second type of character as a tank and a DPS, melee DPS. Unfortunately, this is where the original point, the original important point we delayed until now, which is the fun and the enjoyment, comes into play. Protection Warrior is my least liked tank to play, and I think Fury is pretty cool to play, and I already made a video guide on arms, how I feel about it. In general, Fury and arms, especially at the start of the expansion, are not going to be as enjoyable as they will be later on. So even if I were thinking about playing Warrior, it would have been in about 80 item levels, and not now. So Warrior was just the first one, easy to discard. The second one, also rather easy, was Mage. Mage was both for the first part and the third part, being a range DPS main, or possibly an alternative to the range DPS. If you want to use this same reasoning for choosing your main, please remember that Mage is one of the safest specs you can play together with Warlock and Rogue, due to the fact that they have 3 specs for the same role. Even if you thought something like a Shadow Priest is going to be super strong, in Shadowlands, remember, Shadow Priest only has 1 spec. If Shadow Priest gets nerfed, if they get tuned, if they scale badly, you're done. You have no backup plan, as opposed to a pure DPS class that can just choose whatever spec is meta in any given moment. So Mage has that massive advantage. When I was considering raids as well, you have to consider that Mage gives you Arcane Intellect, that it has an immunity, very good mobility, so plenty of things that would have made Mage wanted. My problem, and why it was removed from the possibilities so quickly, is that I don't like Mage. I don't like any of the specs, the way they play, except for Fire, since Fire was reworked with the hot streak mechanic, but that just wasn't enough. I've been playing since the first day of release of Vanilla, and I have never mained in, competitive high-level content a Mage. Not even as my alt, or one of my alts. The best use I've ever had for a Mage was sitting in the garrison in Warlords to give me money. I have literally and unironically played more Mage in betas and PTRs of this game than the actual live version. Every time I would go in, try them out, try all the specs, see if anything is changing, and then realize, nope, I'm out. And this time it was the same. It just doesn't interest me. So Mage was a goner as well. So the third class that died in the competition was Hunter. Hunter, one of the only 2 classes together with Demon Hunter to have 2 specs only available to them, Marksmanship and Beast Mastery. They were a possible option for my first character, a range DPS main, and my third character. But the problem, similar to Mage, is that I don't really enjoy Marksmanship. I do think BM Hunter is kind of okay, but not really enough to think about maining it. So this is where, again, the enjoyment part comes into effect. Just to be a little bit more relatable, so we can share our stories together. Hunter was my first character in WoW. It was my first main. It's the first class I ever raided with in Vanilla and then in TBC, clearing all the raids, except for the last 2 wings in Naxxramas. And since then, since I rerolled Priest back at the start of Battle of the Lich King, I basically have been let down by Hunter. I've never touched it again as my main. I tried to bring it up again during Mist of Pandaria, because survival was very cool back then, but after that little stint in Mist of Pandaria, I just lost track of Hunter. I was disappointed in how it was simplified and it wasn't that enjoyable to play. It has gotten better right now, but I still don't think it's enough for me to play. I can't just see myself playing Hunter, so Hunter was gone as well. Following Hunter, I paired him with leaving this competition with Demon Hunter, the other 2-spec class. I do enjoy Vengeance, the second type of character I wanted to have, a tank and melee DPS to play in Mythic Plus with. Vengeance is perfect. Vengeance is the spec for Mythic Plus. It is probably the most lopsided of all specs in the game, in terms of how much better is it in Mythic Plus compared to Raids, or in Raids compared to Mythic Plus. Vengeance is very strong in Mythic Plus and much weaker in Raid environments, and I do enjoy it. So it was perfect for the second role. The problem is that it only has one other spec to play, Havoc. And I already made my video about Havoc, and my problem with it is that Blizzard has tried at every turn to neuter the possibility of playing with momentum, playing with Fel Rush, playing with Vengeful Retreat, essentially putting any IQ points in the Demon Hunter rotation past 50. And that to me is a problem. You are all very well aware of my Galaxy brain, and it just becomes too dulled playing Havoc. So to me it wasn't an option, purely because of that. Especially after the Unbound Chaos talent nerf. I just cannot bear playing Demon Hunter Havoc with the usual 3 to 4 buttons. It's just way too simple for me. It doesn't interest me enough. So the 2 Hunters were gone. The next one to fail the challenge was Druid. This is the first a little bit of extra decision making I had to use for choosing to exclude Druid, and that's because while enjoying Balanced Druid, I have already made my review, my video for Balanced Druid, while enjoying it, it is too similar to Elemental Shaman. Balanced Druid is the only available range DPS spec for Druid, the same Elemental is for Shaman. Neither of them have a raid debuff, neither of them have a raid buff, or an external to give to the raid. Essentially, they are a hybrid class with a single spec available to them, without anything you would want to stack them in a raid, like, say, immunities, for example, or externals, or something like that. So it's just too similar. There was essentially too much of a conflict of interest between Elemental and Balance to consider them together. So I looked at the other specs, because technically Druid is eligible for all 3 of my characters, since they have all the roles, right? Well, no, they don't have a melee DPS, ever since they deleted Feral a few expansions ago, and Restoration Druid is my least favorite healer spec, like the way it works. In raid encounters particularly, it is just kill me. It's just horrible to play. In Mythic Plus, you have, the entirety of their utility kit and their damage kit, which makes them more enjoyable, but still not for me. I just don't like playing Resto. Guardian is also on the boring side, as long as when you want to play Mythic Plus and spamming trash and swipe and trash, it's just not enjoyable that much. Even though it has been improved, it's better to play, it's cooler, it's definitely a much more worthwhile pick as a tank, Guardian Druid, that they have been in the last expansion. But it still didn't keep up with the other tanks I was considering, so Druid also dropped out of the race. Another dropout from the race, this is a hybrid genocide because it's going to be Paladin. I excluded Paladin. Another little bit of info about me, I was maining Retribution Paladin in BFA, half of BFA, all the way through the first 2 tiers, Uldir and BOD. I was maining Ret, and despite maining Ret and playing Protection as well, I never quite got into Holy Paladin. The way they work as a melee damage dealing healer, and then the introduction of Glimmer of Light. I'm disappointed. I just don't like the way Glimmer of Light works. I never got into enjoying it, and then Blizzard put it from an Azerite trait to a talent, so I would have stayed the entire expansion, and I just don't like it. In case you're wondering, well, you don't like Restore Druid, you don't like Holy Paladin, you just don't like healers. No, I actually mained, when I mentioned re-rolling from Hunter at the end of TBC into Priest, that was a healer. I healed in Wrath of the Lich King, in Cataclysm, in Mist of Pandaria, and in Warlords of Draenor. So I healed for a lot. I just don't like the way Holy Paladin works. When it came to Prot and Ret, they were a solid choice for my second character. Mythic Plus with a tank and a mini DPS. I just had a couple other tanks that I enjoyed more. and a couple of other mini DPS. That's it. It's still perfectly fine. I would have enjoyed it all the same. The two options that Paladin has for my second character. It's just what I judge to be a little bit less on my preference scale. That's it. So after taking out Paladin with a bludgeon, the only classes left were these 6, and they were all considered for playing. They were all fine, I enjoyed them all, and I would main them. It's just that, you know, I have to choose at least for start just 3 of them. Maybe later it will, you know, come up that it's easier to keep up multiple characters, so I will add a few more, but for now 3 characters was the safe bet, so I had to start getting rid of more. The first one to fall of the Elite 6 was Warlock. This is yet another, you know, special decision making I had to do. After Balanced Druid being too similar to Elemental Shaman, this special decision making was due to the fact that my roster, my raiding guild, has 3 Warlocks. Having already 3 Warlocks makes it difficult to reroll to Warlock as your main range DPS, or even as your alternative range DPS, because there is already 3 of them. It's a little bit congested, and the second character, the Mythic Plus only character that I looked at for being a mini DPS, a tank, or maybe a healer, you know, Warlock is completely out of there. So I considered maybe, because I enjoyed Warlock quite a bit, so I considered maybe I could have used Warlock to be my Mythic Plus character, but then I said no. I don't want to go an entire expansion without tanks or healers to have in Mythic Plus. I just want at least 1 character for it, so Warlock had to fall. You know, they had to take the fall. If I was in a different guild, in a different raid comp that had pool slots on Elemental Shamans and required new Warlocks, yeah, sure, I would have played Warlock and dropped the Shaman. But this is not the case, so Warlock fell. Now we are down to the top 5. This was really tough. This was a decision that, you know, happened through weeks and weeks and weeks of playing the beta and trying all these classes over time and these specs over time. And I had to remove Death Knight. Death Knight was my alt in BFA, the first half of BFA. I did play it quite a bit, and you have seen my Unholy Guide video, you've seen my scaling video where I mentioned Frost being in a good spot. I had the rankings for Mythic Plus and for raids being very positive towards both of the DPS specs of DK, as well as Blood DK being rated very highly for tanks, although that was a while ago. The reason why it's being dropped is very simple. I do enjoy Rogue more, and when it comes to tanks, I do enjoy Brewmaster more, and even Windwalker as a DPS more. The only 3 specs left in this area were Rogue, Monk, and DK was just lagging a tiny bit behind. Because this is not my main choice when it comes to viability and competitiveness and how much in the meta they will be, if you ask me right now, I do believe, of course, that Frost DK is going to be more meta than Windwalker Monk. And if I were to choose my main for raiding, my main to be in a raiding guild, I would go for Frost DK or Unholy DK over Windwalker Monk, but this is my second character, my Mythic Plus character, so I was a little bit lax when it came to considering the viability of all the specs. Fuck no, I wouldn't have mained a Windwalker Monk in a raiding guild, so DK had to fall. And this is what we ended up with. So I decided to keep Elemental Shaman as my main spec. I have talked about it with my GM, and we still do need an Elemental Shaman, so I had no real problems moving away from Elemental Shaman. I tried it in the beta. The failed rework of Fulmination did not go through, otherwise I would have 100% rerolled, and some of the changes made it better to play, more enjoyable, and stronger than BFA, so I have no issues with Elemental. Also, Elemental has a pretty enjoyable melee spec as well, enhancement, and a very enjoyable healer spec. I know not many people are into Resto. I don't think it's not being very popular because it's not very strong. It's not being very strong in Mythic Plus. Plenty of more people playing Resto Druid or Holy Paladin, even Discipline Priest than Shaman. But I did call over a month ago Resto Shaman being strengthened, being made better, a much better single target capabilities now, which is what held it back in Mythic Plus for a long time. With the rework and the extra front loaded damage of Riptide, the much buffed Earth Shield, as well as the conduit for Earth Shield, giving you much stronger single target healing, I think is going to be way more valuable and viable in Mythic Plus. So I do have a healer spec within my main range DPS choice, which is very nice. So Shaman is my main, and I should say is still my main, since it was my main for the last half of BFA. This left me with choosing between Rogue, Monk, and Priest. So this is where logic would drive us. Based on everything I just said would have been my method. So listening and following my own guidelines, I would have put Shadow Priest as my third spec, as my third character, because it's going to be the alternate range DPS to Elemental, right? Both the specs offer 2 different things, 2 different damage profiles, which is what you want when you want an alt character for your raid. You're playing one encounter, this character is good, you're playing this encounter, this spec is OP, everyone is trying to stack this class and this spec because it's very powerful, and Shadow Priest is usually one of the characters, at least since Legion, that can have some crazy dot cleaving, funnel damage, synergy in some encounters, and it can get stacked, so it looked like a smart pick. And then the second pick was between Rogue and Monk for my Mythic Plus class, which would fall on Monk, since I was looking for a tank, a melee DPS and a healer. Essentially Monk has got all of that. I did follow the initial guideline. Monk is going to be my second class. I never thought I would see the day. I have discounted Monk for a long time, I believe since Mist of Pandaria, surprisingly. I noticed that throughout this expansion, this beta for the expansion, every time I was running in my mind this same argument I'm now showing to you guys, Monk would always sneak up a little bit higher in the rankings, right? First I would just be like, okay, fuck Monk, Monk is out. And then I was like, man, Protection Warrior is garbage right now, and Arms and Fury are too slow on release, Warrior is out first. Oh yeah, and fuck Monk. And then I was like, okay, off with Warrior, I don't like Mage either, it's the same as always, I don't like it. Oh yeah, and then now fuck Monk. And then off with Warrior, off with Mage, off with Hunter, off with Demon Hunter, and then off with Monk. It kept going up and up and up and up until it was left at the top. I like Brewmaster. It's my favorite tank to play together with Blood DK. I like Mistweaver. It's not as good to me as Resto Shaman, but it's still very fun for me to play. And Windwalker is, you know, it's enjoyable. You've seen the video already where I rant about the scaling of Monk. I do think Windwalker is doomed as scaling goes, but as far as enjoyment, they are perfectly fine. So it was an easy choice in the end, much to my surprise, but it was. Now, where I'm starting to crumble in my own logic is the last pick. Essentially, it looks like I will be going Rogue instead of Priest, betraying my own idea of having a secondary range DPS for my main character, my Elemental Shaman. Where does this come from? Why did I come to this conclusion? I came to this conclusion because, number one, my roster basically has no more rogues. They all fled the class, essentially. We also apparently now have 3 Shadow Priests, much like we have 3 Warlocks, and 3 Hunters, and 3 Mages. So essentially, my whole idea of wanting to stack an additional spec when one fight was particularly bad for Elemental becomes a little bit weird because we are covered in all the other specs. The only specs we aren't covered are Elemental and Balanced Druid. So I didn't really need this type of extra range DPS spec, while at the same time we would kind of need an extra rogue, since we have none. And also because, similar to Shadow Priest, Subtlety can also be one of those specs that you can stack. You have seen this expansion, what happened with Zul, what happens with Funnel, right? What happens with, there are 6 targets and you really want to kill one of them. That's why you want to stack sub-rogues. So it is a very good spec if you want to have an alternative. Additionally, when it comes to healing, as I mentioned, Discipline, enjoying Discipline. As I said, the only 2 specs I like more than Discipline are Mistweaver and Restoration Shaman, which were my other 2 choices. So the reasons to pick Priest kept going down and down and down, until eventually I realized why. I enjoy playing Subtlety more than I enjoy playing Shadow, and I enjoy playing the 2 healers more than I enjoy playing Disc and Holy, so eventually I didn't find any more reasons to just keep going for Shadow Priest, which I initially intended to. And this is what I ended up with. The choices of Elemental Shaman for my range DPS spec, Monk for my all-purpose Mythic Plus spec, and then Rogue for my secondary raid spec as well as Mythic Plus spec too. I have 2 healing specs that I enjoy the most. I have the tank spec, one of the 2 tank specs I enjoy the most, and one of the 2 DPS specs that I enjoy the most, Sub and Elemental. With this being said, I still enjoy many more specs to play. None of the specs I discarded were necessarily individually worse than some of the specs I'm choosing here to play. It's just that when you look at the whole package, they go lacking a little bit. I enjoy Frost DK, I enjoy Vengeance, I enjoy Balanced Druid, Red Paladin. It's just that when you have to pick the whole class, they were left behind. So, this was me, guys. This is what I'm going to be playing, starting with 3 characters. We'll see if it's going to be easy to play more of them, or maybe if it's totally out of reach to keep up 3 of them at the same time and it's going to be a total drag, and Blizzard will sneak in some other grinding mechanism. I don't believe they will. At least until the first content patch. After that, I don't promise anything. Tell me what you guys think. No, wait, don't. I don't care about what you guys think about my character. Tell me what you want to play. yourself? And more importantly, how many characters do you plan to play? How many do you think you will be able to play in Shadowlands? While you think about this, I'm going off. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, I swear I thought Hunter had 3 specs. I swear.